There is a part of you that you have never directly seen. It walks behind you. It speaks in the disproportionate reaction, the pattern inside the relationship that hurts, the wall that goes up the moment something good arrives. It is the part of yourself you decided you were not. Carl Jung gave it a name. He called it the shadow. But long before modern depth psychology had a clinical vocabulary for the unconscious, Hermetic and alchemical writers spoke in the language of correspondence. That which is above is like that which is below. Later, occult language would turn this inward as a second formula. As within, so without. What you refuse to see in yourself often appears first in what you keep reacting to, in the shape of other people. The practice of finally seeing this has a modern name, shadow work. You may have tried it, and much of what is sold under that name today stops just before the part Jung warned you about. The version he actually meant is older than the words we have for it, and it asks you to face what you have refused to see in yourself. The modern version of shadow work is everywhere right now. Workshops, journals, online courses. The market for it is enormous, and the promises it makes are gentle. But somewhere between Jung's clinical writing and the modern wellness aisle, the practice he was actually describing got replaced. The dangerous, patient, observational work became something easier, something the algorithm could carry. I'm not here to give you another workbook. I'm here to do 3 things. To name what shadow work isn't, to show you what Jung was pointing at, and how Hermetic and alchemical writers preserved a related language of correspondence long before him, and then to tell you what the real practice costs you. If you have done the journaling, attended the workshop, recited the affirmations, and felt nothing change, that wasn't your failure. You may have read the books, sat with the prompts, done the work as it was given to you, and still found yourself running the same patterns, the same reactions, the same wall the moment something good arrives. There is a gap between the effort you have put in and the change you can actually feel. That gap isn't a sign you weren't trying hard enough. It is a sign that the version you were given was reshaped somewhere along the way to fit an audience instead of a practitioner, made to be shareable, photogenic, easy to recommend. And when something built for an audience doesn't move you, it is easy to walk away thinking the work itself is the problem, or worse, that you are, that something in you is built to stay stuck. Neither is true. You were sold a version of the practice, not what makes the work real. Before we can say what shadow work is, we have to clear what it isn't. 5 things that get sold as shadow work but aren't. It isn't journaling. Journaling has a small place. It can clarify thinking after the fact or organize what you have already noticed. But shadow work isn't what happens on the page. It is what happens in the mind, in real time, before any pen ever moves. The practice is mental, the keen observation of your own reactions as they occur, the mental note you take when something in you flares, and the discipline to hold that note across days, across weeks, sometimes years, until the pattern shows itself. Most shadow material is not recognized in moments of calm reflection. It is recognized when the same kind of person walks into the room a second time, and something in you that should not move, moves. You cannot prepare for that on a page. You can only prepare for it in your perception. The practice itself is the observation, keen, sustained, held in the mind, not the notebook. It isn't embracing your dark side either. The shadow isn't asking to be embraced. It is asking to be seen, which is far more difficult. Embracing is something the conscious self does from a position of stability. It is a choice you make about something you have already decided exists. Seeing is something else entirely. Seeing means letting your understanding of yourself expand to include what it has not yet contained. You do not lose who you have been. You become more accurate about who you actually are. An accuracy of that kind only comes from one thing: observation, patient, honest, willing to be wrong about what it expected to find. It isn't emotional release. Catharsis discharges feeling. It does not change the structure that produced the feeling. The relief is real, the pattern is unchanged, and the material returns. Real integration is the slow reorganization of the personality around what was previously denied, not the brief intensity of expressed emotion. And in a moment, we'll see why the version Jung warned about isn't just incomplete. It's the part of this practice that can hurt you. It isn't a weekend workshop. Workshops can offer initiation. They cannot offer integration. The work unfolds in conditions no workshop can manufacture. Ordinary life, sustained relationships, the gradual recognition of patterns that only become visible across decades. A complex that crystallized when you were 6 does not release its function in 48 hours of breath work. It releases when something old is recognized repeatedly over years. That can't be scheduled. It can only be lived. And here's the line the wellness industry left out of the brochure: shadow work isn't safe. Jung was clear that this was not casual self-improvement. The encounter with the shadow can destabilize the personality. The repressed material was often rejected for adaptation or survival reasons. In contemporary clinical language, surfacing it without enough inner stability can look like flooding, dissociation, regression, or what Jung called enantiodromia, the breakthrough of the unconscious opposite when consciousness has become too one-sided. The repressed nice person may not become assertive. They may become cruel. The relentless intellectual may not access feeling. They may drown in it. The danger is not imaginary. So here is what doesn't add up. If shadow work might destabilize you, why does wellness culture sell it as a path to healing? And if it can't be done in a journal or a weekend, how is it ever done at all? If this is the kind of honesty you've been looking for, you're in the right place. Subscribe if you want observation without decoration. This is what Project Infinity does. Now comes the reversal. Once those distortions fall away, something clearer appears underneath. The shadow isn't your dark side. In plain language, it is your wholeness minus your self-image. Jung described the shadow as everything the subject refuses to acknowledge about himself. Refuses, that's the load-bearing word. Not evil, not darkness, refused. And it isn't unique to you. Jung placed the shadow among the great archetypal patterns of the psyche. Universal forms the unconscious keeps reproducing across cultures, dreams, and myths. Alongside figures such as the persona, the anima and animus, the child, the trickster, and the wise old man or wise old woman. Every person carries one. Many inward-looking traditions have found some language for the rejected, hidden, or doubled self, which means your shadow isn't a fixed repository of bad things. It's the dynamic, living product of every decision you've ever made about who you are. It changes when you change. It grows when you narrow. It thickens the longer it lives outside your awareness. Which leads to the part most people don't see coming. the shadow doesn't only hold what's destructive, it holds the positive qualities the ego rejected. The intellectual whose tenderness lives in the shadow, the competent person whose dependency lives there, the independent one whose longing for belonging, the one thing they were taught not to need, has been waiting underneath them their entire life. Later, Jungians often call this the gold in the shadow. What if what you've been told is too much about you, is the part you most need to claim? What if the disowned thing isn't the threat, it's the missing piece? Earlier, I asked why wellness culture can sell shadow work as healing without destabilizing the people who buy into it. Now we can answer that. Because the wellness version doesn't actually engage the shadow. It engages the conscious mind's description of the shadow, a fundamentally different operation. Resistance, discomfort, shame, or strong feeling are often the first signs that you have touched something real. If the work never touches your self-image at all, it may still be circling the material rather than entering it. So here are the 3 real phases of the work. You won't find them in a workbook. Recognition. You cannot integrate what you cannot see, and most projections aren't recognized at the time. They're recognized in retrospect, sometimes years later, when the same pattern repeats with a different object. The first skill is learning to see the patterns themselves. Engagement. Once recognized, shadow material has to be entered into dialogue with, treated as autonomous psychic agencies with their own histories and their own protective functions. Jung called one form of this active imagination. Alchemy gave the psyche images of separation, purification, and recombination. Grimoire magic staged encounters with powers outside the ordinary ego. These are not the same practice, but they rhyme around one fact. What has been split off must be encountered before it can be reclaimed. Integration, not eliminating the material, but incorporating it into a personality wide enough to hold it. The repressed rage becomes legitimate assertion. The disowned tenderness becomes the capacity for relationship. Nothing is destroyed. Everything previously refused is reclaimed. And here's the diagnostic signature, the single thing you can use to find shadow material in your own life today. It's the disproportionate emotional reaction, when your response to someone is much larger than the situation warrants. When they enrage you, or you idealize them, or you cannot stop thinking about them. You may be looking at your own shadow material reflected back, especially when the intensity returns across different people and situations. The intensity is the signal. Jung put it precisely. Projections change the world into the replica of one's own unknown face, which is the psychological cousin of the older Hermetic correspondence. That which is above is like that which is below. A related observation carried by a different vocabulary in a different century. I want to leave you with one question. Share your answer in the comments. What you notice in yourself may help someone else recognize the same pattern. Think of the last time you reacted to something far more strongly than the moment actually called for. Not what set it off. The intensity of what came up inside you. That is where shadow work begins. There is one shadow pattern worth pausing on because it is so widespread and so misunderstood. The inner saboteur. The conventional reading treats the saboteur as malevolent, a part of the psyche that wants you to fail. That reading is incomplete. The saboteur is not malevolent. It is anachronistic. It carries the wisdom of a child who once survived a particular environment by self-sabotage and has never received the information that the environment changed. The strategies that kept you alive then are still being executed now. Staying small, not being seen, not asking for too much, not letting yourself be wanted. All of it carried out by a part of the psyche that doesn't know the present may no longer be the past. Which raises two questions. If the part of you that sabotages success is not your enemy, then what is it? And what has it been trying to do for you all along? And if the shadow is, by definition, what you cannot see in yourself, can you ever see it alone? Now the demands. This is the part the wellness industry struggles to sell because it cannot be packaged as relief. Time. Shadow work is slow. The cycles are long. Months for the smaller patterns, years for the deeper ones, decades for the foundational structures that crystallized in childhood. A complex that took a lifetime to form does not release its function in a weekend, no matter how intensive the weekend. This isn't a defect of the practice. It's the nature of the material. The pace cannot be forced. Honesty, the kind that doesn't perform. Most of what we tell ourselves about ourselves is curated, smoothed, filtered for self-image. The work requires the willingness to see the uncurated version, what you actually do, what you actually feel, what you actually want, even when those things contradict the story you have been telling yourself for 30 years. This kind of honesty isn't dramatic. It is daily, ordinary, often unflattering, and it has to be sustained because the curated version reasserts itself every time you stop watching for it. Earlier, I asked what the saboteur actually wants. Now we can name it. The saboteur doesn't want to defeat you. It wants to keep you safe, according to a definition of safety that hasn't been updated since you were small. The work isn't to attack it. In contemporary trauma-informed language, the work is to update its information. Slowly, through sustained recognition that the present is no longer the past. Recognition releases what willpower never can. And here is the structural reality almost no one talks about. You cannot see your own shadow by looking directly at it. That is the definition of shadow. It is the part of you that is hidden from the very perception you would use to look for it. You can do extensive work on your own. Observation, dream attention, projection analysis, the disciplined examination of your own reactions. But the deepest material does not yield to direct introspection. It hides inside the lens you are looking through, and yet you are not without a mirror. The world reflects you back every day in the patterns that keep returning. The kind of person who keeps walking into your life. The conflict that arrives in new costumes but the same shape. The reaction that keeps firing in situations that do not deserve it. These recurrences are the shadow becoming visible, not through introspection, through repetition. Which means solo shadow work is not impossible. It is just not solo in the way most people think. Your life gives you recurring data, reactions, patterns, conflicts, attractions, avoidances. The same material in different forms until you learn to read it. This does not mean every painful pattern is your fault. Some recurrences are circumstance or context or other people's actions. It means recurrence is worth observing closely before you explain it away. And then, one more warning. One common failure mode of contemporary shadow work isn't refusing to do the work. It is doing enough of it to dissolve the old structure, but not enough to complete the passage, and then crystallizing an identity around the half-finished work. The work itself becomes the new identity. The wound becomes the new persona. The reluctance to integrate becomes the next thing to be integrated. The recognition that you have a shadow is the beginning of the work, not a destination to settle into. One more thing worth naming briefly. Across Western esotericism, related pattern languages appear. Jung read the alchemical magnum opus as a symbolic drama of psychic transformation, not merely as a chemical procedure. Goetic grimoire magic staged encounters with spirits, which some later occultists, including Crowley, could read psychologically. Modern Hermetic and left-hand path occultists mapped comparable confrontations through the Qliphoth, the shadowed underside of the tree. These are not the same tradition, they are not the same practice, but they all circle one observation. What is rejected does not disappear, it returns, demanding to be encountered. So if all of that is true, where do you actually begin? 4 things, not techniques. Orientations. First, train your perception on intensity. When your reaction to a person or a moment is far louder than the situation seems to call for, stop. That intensity is not noise. It is the shadow announcing itself in the only language it has. You do not have to interpret it yet. You only have to notice it. Second, hold the observation across time. The first time a pattern shows up is only an event. The second time is a coincidence. The third time is data. Most patterns are not recognized in the moment. They are recognized when the same kind of person or the same kind of feeling walks back into your life. Mental memory is the muscle the practice trains. Hold one clean mental note. What happened, how strong the reaction was, and what old story it seemed to carry. Third, look for the gold, not only the dark. The shadow does not just hold the things you were told were bad. It holds the things you were told were too much. The tenderness, the ambition, the strength, the longing. Whatever you have been quietly carrying out of the room your whole life, ask yourself if it is time to bring it back in. And fourth, pay attention to what keeps returning in your reactions, your choices, and your relationships. Whatever is invisible to you in yourself often finds a way to appear again and again, until you learn to recognize the shape of it, the kind of person who keeps appearing in your life, the conflict that arrives in new costumes but the same shape, the disappointment that has happened too many times to be coincidence. They may not be only bad luck, they may also be the shadow announcing itself through recurrence. Your life is already the mirror. You only have to learn to read it. These are the entry points. The practice that follows is not a procedure to complete. It is an orientation you carry into your life, daily, for as long as you are alive. And what does that orientation produce over time? Not all at once, not in any way visible from the outside, but slowly, the constant inner conflict begins to quiet, not because you have defeated something inside you, because you have stopped fighting parts of yourself that were never your enemies. The reactions that used to hijack you start to feel less like failures and more like information. The patterns you swore you had broken come back, yes, but they come back recognizable, workable, smaller, and the relationships that used to collapse may begin to last longer because you are bringing more of yourself into them instead of less. The parts of yourself you exiled long ago start to come home. The tenderness, the ambition, the strength, the longing. With them, a kind of wholeness you may not have felt since you were very young, a self that is not at war with itself. The sabotage that ran your life for years may begin to quiet. Because the part of you that needed it has finally been given the news that it may be safe enough to loosen its grip. These changes do not announce themselves. They are felt before they can be named. The integrated person experiences suffering as information rather than failure, holds contradictions without collapsing them, acts ethically because that is how they operate, not because rules require it, continues the work without identifying as someone who does the work. None of this can be fully displayed from the outside. That is why the actual practice cannot be packaged. What was sold to you may not have been shadow work itself. It may have been the appearance of doing it. The real practice is older, slower, and harder than that. And it is far closer to what you were actually hoping for. If you want to keep observing alongside the channel, subscribe. Project Infinity Network is where we keep learning to see. And here is your starting point. Not an assignment, an invitation. Over the next 7 days, watch for one disproportionate reaction in yourself. Just one. You don't have to analyze it. You don't have to fix it. You only have to see that something in you is being shown to you. That is how the practice starts. Everything else is built on that. The shadow isn't asking to be embraced. It is asking to be seen. That is where the practice begins, and that is where it stays.